Hello, this is Richard Kaczynski, author of the revised and expanded edition of Perdurabo, The Life of Aleister Crowley, which will be released in hardcover by North Atlantic Books on August 10th, 2010. Today, I'd like to share with you a couple readings featuring selections that are brand new to the expanded edition. There's a lot of new material in this book, and I wanted to give you a sneak peek at some of it. My first excerpt deals with the 1917 police raid of the London Temple of Mysteria Mystica Maxima, the UK branch of OTO over which Crowley was head. This was a highly significant episode in Crowley's American period, as it demonstrates how relations with his British counterparts deteriorated as a result of his extended absence during World War I. It also illustrates how Crowley's controversial espionage work to help the British war effort was, back in his home country, mistaken as political treason. Crowley's espionage work has received a lot of attention lately thanks to Richard Spence's book Secret Agent 666. I also deal with this subject in Perdurabo, quoting some previously unpublished Crowley material. This raid, however, has been glossed over in previous biographies, so today I wanted to feature my account of it. At its new location at 93 Regent Street, MMM thrived under the direction of medium Mary Davies, 5th degree. Mary Davies, née Brick, was born in 1867 on Portsea Island, Hampshire, to Elizabeth and Edward Brick, the latter a civil guard sergeant at the Portsea convict prison. She was the oldest of 5 children. According to Davies, my name, Mary, was given to me in baptism in the hope that I should be blessed by the Virgin Mother. So I was brought up and confirmed in the faith soon after the age of 7, made my first confession and communion, and was enrolled in the Order of the Scapular of Our Lady of Mount Carmel at the age of 12. End quote. While a girl of 7, she awoke to a spiritual visitation from her patron, Saint Teresa. From that point, her childhood was filled with clairvoyant and other psychic experiences. This gradually led to her leaving Catholicism and devoting herself to study, public speaking, and holding classes. In February 1886, she married William Robert Davies, a friend of the family and a petty officer in the Royal Navy. She had 2 children, William Clements, who died in 1893 from childhood illness, and Theophilus Stuart. Relocating to London, the Davies family encountered a spiritualist society, of which Mary would become president. They also formed a circle of 14 to 16 people, holding meetings at their home twice a week and launching her career as a medium. Her career up to 1912 is detailed in her memoir, My Psychic Recollections, from 1912. Although reviewed in the Theosophist and Athenaeum, it is Crowley's 1912 review in the Equinox that is of most interest. As he writes, Mrs. Davies is a professional medium. Of such I have said things which only my incapacity for invective prevented me from being severe. But though, no doubt, the phenomenon recorded in the book are non-evidential, I do feel the sincerity of the writer. I am confident of her good faith. End quote. Indeed, Davies had been aware of Crowley in his circle as early as 1910, when she met George Rafalovich at one of the rites, whether one of the lesser rituals like the Rite of Phoenix or the grand rites of Aloysius is unclear. Both Crowley and Coe privately disparaged her interests in clairvoyance and spirituality, but quietly tolerated them in light of her other strengths. By the summer of 1913, she took her 3rd degree initiation, and by 1916 the Lodge, with her help, moved into its space on Regent Street. MMM members were unanimous in her praise. Organist William Steph Langston described her as, quote, one of the most lovable of her charming sex. She has sweetness, tact, power, and ability in profusion. She is just the one to attract the people we need. Coe concurred. Quote, she's a good soul and a good sort altogether, and her gift, which appears to amount to ability to knock about on the plane next to the material, is quite genuine. End quote. That April, Davies reported, quote, we had 3 initiations and an affiliation of a master from Rugby. We now have only 2 first degree, all the others are raised. As a lodge, we number 9 Minerval and 11 first, with 3 waiting initiation. End quote. As G.M. Coe recounted, quote, we owe much to Mary Davies. Practically every new member has been brought in by her. Besides, the membership is steadily growing." End quote. Alas, during this fecund period, MMM came under police scrutiny. Coe was shadowed by an investigator, his reputation the subject of an official inquiry. Late in the winter of 1917, he was finally questioned about what MMM was and the nature of his involvement. It soon became clear that this inquiry was connected to A.C.'s political writings. As Coe wrote to Crowley, quote, "I learned that it is only my known probity of character, which unknown to me has been closely inquired into, that has satisfied the authorities that the Lodge is exactly what is set forth in the manifesto, and that we have no political motive. The authorities say that so long as I am in control in England, and so long as we are not helping you, they are satisfied and we may continue. Otherwise, I have no doubt we should have been closed down. I must make it clear that everyone who has joined us did so in complete ignorance of your views, and is guiltless of any political motive." End quote. The authorities' assurances, however, proved fleeting. A couple months later, on Monday, May 14, 1917, Detective Inspector John Curry of New Scotland Yard went with another officer to 93 Regent Street. The glass panel on the door bore the letters MMM, which he knew stood for Mysteria Mystica Maxima. Inside, they found additional signage that read, "Mary Davies, sittings 11 to 5, and Clairvoyance." Entering a front room on the 3rd floor, they found 5 men and 5 women dressed in Master Mason's uniforms, and Davies herself dressed as a worshipful master or head of the lodge. The police presented a warrant for Davies' arrest. Protesting that she had done nothing wrong, she was told, quote, "I understand you call this the Order of the Temple of the Orient, and your founder is Aleister Crowley, a man of evil reputation and a traitor to this country." The arrest warrant, however, simply charged her under the Vagrancy Act for telling fortunes. She was taken into custody, and the police seized the furniture, regalia, books, and papers for examination, never to return them. The arrest garnered headlines, like the Times, "MMM Mysteries, Order of the Temple of the Orient Raided." Witnesses for the prosecution recounted visits to her under false pretenses. Bertha Brundle consulted Davies about a fictitious sick child and received instructions on how to effect a spiritual cure. Similarly, Blanche Daisley consulted her about a similarly fictitious brother in the Flying Corps, to be told that he had died, but that he was now being guarded by 2 spirits. For this advice, the woman paid 10 shillings 6 pence. Davies protested that she did not profess to tell fortunes. She described herself as an author and preacher. Nevertheless, she was found guilty and fined £40 plus 10 guineas costs. Crowley initially believed the raid was arranged by Everard Fielding as a publicity stunt to maintain his cover, but soon realized it was an official response to his wartime activities. This hampered fundraising efforts to pay his passage back to England. As Coe informed Crowley, quote, "We cannot even think of raising funds to bring you back, desirable as it is, when we are told you will certainly be arrested if you return." End quote. As a solution, A.C. resigned as head of MMM and appointed Frater Akkad as nominal Grand Master. In subsequent letters, Coe wrote to Crowley, quote, "It's just care frater now, as in happier days of old," end quote, and, quote, "as you are no longer Grand Master but my Guru as of old," end quote. Nevertheless, efforts to continue operating were difficult. Other than membership dues, MMM's only revenue came from sales of Crowley's books, and even this had to be discontinued. Quote, "I've not been able to supply one of the rare orders for books lately," Coe explained to Crowley at the end of 1917. Quote, "The real and vital reason, however, and here you force my hand, is that the police were trying to trace your property in this country." End quote. In response to the bad publicity resulting from both her arrest and her connection to the evil and traitorous Crowley, Davies ran the following letter in the Occult Review. "On May 15 last, The press generally stated in connection with the prosecution against me, Mary Davies, of 93 Regent Street, that I was the protégé of a man of evil reputation and a traitor to this country. I desire emphatically to disavow any such association. I have no knowledge whatsoever, nor ever had, of the views and actions, political, social, or private, of the person referred to. The only link I had with this person was on Masonic grounds, and in the mysteries which no one could be more profound. It is scarcely necessary to stress my own patriotism. As my public know, since the beginning of the war, my intercessory services at Kensington have been solely such as to encourage and to fortify every patriotic effort, and I deliberately repudiate the stigma implied by the quotation given above." End quote. Davies appealed the ruling, but on October 26, 1917, the decision was upheld. That concludes the first reading. Moving on to my next selection, one of the most remarkable things about Crowley is that he seemed to live so many lives at the same time. He was an occultist, prophet, poet, mountain climber, painter. The list of his varied accomplishments goes on and on. This was especially true throughout his American period during World War I, where his interests led him to all kinds of directions in an effort to make ends meet as an expat in an exciting country. His activities in Washington, D.C. illustrate the variety of things that Crowley was prone to be involved in, all at the same time. Beginning on page 301 of Perdurabo. It was perhaps the Washington Post's 4-column story on Crowley that first brought him to the attention of eccentric and colorful Stuart X, Henry Clifford Stuart, whose letters Crowley was hired to edit and introduce for the book A Prophet in His Own Country. As Crowley described Stuart, imagine to yourself a big man, a really big man, 6'3" in height, broad and well-proportioned. The entire impression is bigness. And, as should always be the case with Homo sapiens, the most important part of the impression is given by the head. Such a brow is only seen in the world's greatest thinkers. When he speaks, he is transfigured before you. The placid power of the man gives place to elemental energy. End quote. Born in New York in 1865, he was 10 years Crowley's senior. He began working for his father at age 14, and by 21 had become freight traffic manager for Central America's most important railroad. From there, he went on to sundry other jobs, including in real estate, as a mining engineer, and as U.S. Consul General to Guatemala City. He spent 15 years in Spanish America building railroads, and Crowley identified him as the land commissioner of the Panama Railroad. A successful businessman, he was, quote, one of the big boomers in Guatemala industries, end quote, and had financial investments in New Orleans. He married Grace Ingersoll Patchen in New York on December 11, 1894, and eventually settled in Washington, D.C., where in 1915 he was voted a member of the Washington Board of Trade. Stuart was an avid letter writer, sending his quirky, almost free verse observations about life and politics to hundreds of newspapers and other correspondents across the country. One recipient, the White House, responded to the first few letters, but the vast majority he sent thereafter went unanswered. The Secret Service, investigating, found him harmless and light. Another recipient was John R. Rathan, editor of the Providence Journal, who forwarded the letter to the Bureau of Investigation, suggesting, quote, "You might give this lunatic the once-over," end quote. Crowley collected, edited, and commented on 191 of these letters, which appeared as A Prophet in His Own Country that summer. Ever the entrepreneur, AC even tried selling a copy to Theodore Roosevelt. He also pitched a new edition, equally unsuccessfully, to Henry Holt and Company. Quote, "Its complete originality, both of thought and of style, marks this book as unique. Nothing since Nietzsche in Germany and Carlyle in England is at all comparable to it." End quote. The book's marketing, however, hit a snag when advertisements instructed that orders be sent to the Fifth Avenue Bank, Crowley's bank in New York. The volume of mail became so bothersome that they forced Crowley to close his account with them. To promote the book, Stuart also was wont to leave copies in various hotels during his travels. Despite the book being by Stewart, its editor also received attention in press reviews. The New Age quipped, quote, "To be introduced and annotated by Mr. Aleister Crowley is a distinction that most prophets have been unable to obtain. Either prophets are rare in America, or they avoid introductions by, perhaps even to, Mr. Crowley." End quote. Meanwhile, the Indianapolis Sunday Star observed, quote, "With Mr. Crowley's tremendous introduction in mind," nobody introduces Crowley, "the reader will no doubt approach the lucubrations of Mr. Stewart with keen expectations." The August 1916 Vanity Fair featured an article about Stewart. Although unsigned, it is doubtlessly by Crowley, who damns the book and author with faint praise. Quote, "His point of view may be rudely described as that of an inspired baby. His writing style destroys the peace of mind of editors, and it will not be his fault if he does not sell at least one copy." 2 months later, Crowley published a letter in the Washington Post insisting that the European press had mistakenly claimed that he and Stewart X were the same person, and that Crowley had only written the, quote, "imbecile introduction," end quote. Since the Washington Post is not a European newspaper, the letter appears to be a publicity stunt. Stewart eventually relocated to Northern California and, after his wife died in 1929, he legally changed his name to Stewart X, giving himself, arguably, the world's shortest last name. He died on May 21, 1952 in Alameda, California. While preparing a prophet in his own country for press that spring, Crowley encountered a curious array of distractions in Washington, D.C. One of these involved a missing jade statue of Guan Yin, a title of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion in Buddhism. On May 28, 1916, the following ad ran in the Chicago Daily Tribune and papers in 50 other cities from Washington to St. Louis. "Jade Guanyin stolen. $10,000 will be paid for information relating to the recovery intact of the Jade Guanyin statue stolen from Dr. S.Y.S. on August 29, 1914, Stewart X, 2619 Woodley Place, Washington, D.C." Dr. S.Y.S. is Sun Yat-sen, the Chinese revolutionary and father of modern China, who served in 1912 as the first provisional president of the newly formed Republic of China. The ad sparked interest in the press, causing Stewart to say, quote, "This is a very delicate matter. I prefer to think over it until tomorrow morning, and if you will telephone me then, I may be able to say something about it." End quote. Upon the statue's recovery a few days later, Crowley, on Stewart's behalf, announced to the press that its recovery, quote, "will, through its powerful influence over the minds of superstitious Chinese, mean a return to power of Dr. Sun Yat-sen." End quote. At this same time, an article appeared in the Washington Post on the Oriental Mind. An elaboration of the previous statement attributed to Crowley, the article, although unsigned, is likely by A.C. Quote, "Once more in hand, a wonderful influence is promised over the minds of the superstitious Chinese, with the by no means remote possibility that through its beneficent presence Sun Yat-sen will again be placed in the full tide of prosperity as regards himself and the future of his beloved nation." End quote. Other, less prominent activities also landed Crowley in the D.C. press. He gave a lengthy interview for the April 30th Washington Post about good and evil spirits and the nature of possession, after poisoner Dr. Arthur Warren Waite claimed in his defense that he was possessed by an evil spirit called the Man from Egypt, who drove him to murder his in-laws. In a May 12th letter to the Washington Post, Crowley, recalling his Statue of Liberty stunt, nominated Ireland as arbiters of universal peace. On Friday, May 26th, Crowley played 4 games of chess at the National Press Club against 25-year-old chess champion Norman Tweed Whitaker. Despite excellent playing on both sides, Whitaker won all 4 games. Later that summer, Crowley posed as a physician to condemn the cruel way in which anesthesia was administered, claiming psychological stress was the cause of 9 out of 10 deaths in surgery. Crowley advocated allowing patients to self-medicate, to slowly savor the ether intoxication so that when the surgeon arrives, the patient goes under easily and willingly. and I quote, "The nurse should be instructed to lead the thoughts of the patient into pleasant channels. She should describe as vividly as she can the glories and joys of ether. The surgeon should arrive from 2 to 3 hours after the beginning. If things have been done properly, the patient should feel just about as much interest in his arrival as the theater-goer does when the curtain rises." End quote. Crowley advocated this medical practice in a letter to the editor of the Washington Post, signing himself Aleister Crowley, St. George's Hospital, London. Well, that's about all the time I have for today's episode. I hope you found it as interesting and exciting to hear as it was for me to research and write. Thanks to Speech in the Silence for giving me the opportunity to share these passages with you.
Thanks to Richard Kaczynski for this exciting preview of what is to come in the new edition of